Hi. When Vectorworks first starts up, you will be presented with a screen very similar to this one. The paper outline in your design space, and generally there is only one sheet on the design space, called often Design Layer 1. It sits there, and it is generally, because it is an American program, an American file format. If you want to change this, we can do this. But first, it's important to know that there are two different preference settings within Vectorworks. The first one is accessed via the Vectorworks drop-down menu and go into Preferences. Now this sets the system-wide, in other words, Vectorworks' system preferences. And there are a couple in there we would like to change because they'll make life a little bit easier for you. The second preferences are accessed via the File menu, and they go down to Document Settings, and we've got a whole load of things we can start to look at. These are file dependent and change every time you load a new a new file on. So it's important to understand the difference. System-wide and file dependent. So the first one, Vectorworks. Let's go into the system preferences, and when you click on the tab, you'll get this up, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different tabs up there. Now, generally, I'll say to you, leave these alone for the time being. We'll look at them later in more detail. But there are a couple that you may want to have a look at, and the first one is in session. Now, I've just switched this one off because this is useful but annoying. Now, if I switch it on and do OK and draw a line, can you hear that? Every time you hit a node, it clicks. Now that's useful in certain cases, but often as not, it isn't, and it gets quite annoying. It's also annoying if you're in an office and there's 4 or 5 of you all drawing and they're all going click, 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 click. So I would say to you, know where it is and switch it off, or turn the volume right down. It'll have to be on before you can access it. Turn it right down, or even just up a little bit, so that you can hear it but it's not heard by others. But in preference, I turned it off. The next one I want you to look at is the user folders. Now I just want you to look and see where this is at the moment, because generally it's in, now this, I run a Mac, so it's in my users file under Steve Gage, which is me, in my library, application support, Vectorworks 2009. Now just bear in mind where that is, because what I'm going to do now is say go to the autosave tab and click that. Now I have mine set to autosave every 10 minutes. I want it to confirm before save, because sometimes I don't want it to, and I want it to overwrite the original file. In other words, the one that I'm actually using, I want it to overwrite that file. In other words, save it automatically for me every 10 minutes. I could save it to an autosave backup copy, so I've got 2 bites at the cherry. I've got the main file, which I should be saving, and I can have this one, which is the backup file, and that's where that long string that you looked at earlier comes from, and it's there. I don't use that one at all. I just use this because in Mac I've got down here, I've got Time Machine running, so I've always got a good copy set up anyway on a different server. So those are the system-wide settings. There are others, the interactive and the sessions, and we've just looked at sound, but there's a whole load of stuff down here, and the display. Really, leave those alone for a while, and we'll look at those later in more depth. So that's it. Just checking for the session, and I've got my sound turned off, and that's great. So let's press OK. The next thing I want to look at is the actual file settings. Now these are dependent of the program, and every time you load a file in, these settings will take place. So what I want to do now is to get rid of this particular file that we've got at the moment and replace it with something that's more akin to my working. So the first thing I need to do is to go down to there and do document settings. Now I'll go into document units first because this is the one that is most pertinent to me. Now, I'm old enough to remember feet and inches and having to use them professionally, but these days in the UK we don't. Architecture tends to work in millimetres, so I'm going to go down to my millimetre setting and set those. I don't want to show a unit mark, in other words mm. It's decimal, so it's automatically gone on to that, and the decimal position, well, 1 millimetre is absolutely fine, and I want to put leading zeros in because that does help me. Now the area is in square feet. Well, that's not good for me because I'm in square metres, and a position of 0.01. I tend to go down to centimetre sort of stuff on that. And the volume is not cubic feet but cubic metres, and again a position in centimetres is fine for me. And the degrees, okay, angles is good for me. I don't use radians or gradients. Degrees is exactly what I want to see, and I'll leave the precision exactly like that. I'll go into what these two are later, but they are useful and we will use them when we reset up the drawing a little bit better. So that's it on for that one. I've changed over my general display into millimetres, and that's absolutely good for me. The next thing I want to do is to go back in, and you can't, this is the only way you can do it in Vectorworks, you have to keep on saving and going back in. Now let's have a look at the document preferences. There's not a fat lot that I want to show you here, except for this one, dimensions. Now, because I work in architecture, I tend to use the architecture standard form for dimensions, and it's good for me. But if you're in another country or you know how to use the different ones, then by all means change it to the one that suits your way of working. I happen to quite like that, the architecture one that they use. It works fine for me, and as you can see it's already set up in millimetres, and that's good for me. Resolution, leave it as normal quality unless you're really into it, and for resolution don't get involved in those. So that's it. Now let's go down here and have another little look and see what other things are there. We've done document preferences, we've done the units. Now let's just have a look at the document setup as a whole, and it gives you one other thing that's quite useful to get rid of. I don't like the grid, and this is in 2009 this is the place that you get rid of it. Now a lot of people say, oh, I didn't know how to get rid of it, I've always been drawing with the grid on there, but it's annoying. And this is where you get rid of it. So you go into document setup, you go into there and you change that. You either leave it on, show grid lines, or get out of grid lines. It's as simple as that. Let's cancel that. And that's all I want to show you at the moment. This is the drawing board title block area as well, and it's where you set up which one you actually want to use. I'll do a separate video for that because there's a lot more to it than just clicking and using one, and I want to do a complete video on that one. So that's all I want to show you. Now the other thing that we need to look at is layer scale. This is design layer scale. Now at the moment when it comes up, because it was in Imperial, it's been set to 1:48. Now I don't particularly like that. Now generally I do plans, and I like to do my plans in 1:100, and the general rule is use a scale in design layer that will match or equal the scale that you're going to use in your sheet layers. This is where the printing goes. Now I'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but to the moment just change that to 1:100 and click OK, and click OK on that. OK, a lot of OKs here. Right, now the other thing we need to look at is what is going on here. That paper size, I don't know what it is. So the first thing we do is to go down to here and go down to page setup. Now the page setup, the easiest and quickest way to look at it is to go make sure that the page boundary is set, and those are 1:1. Go into the bottom one on the right hand side, printer setup. Don't use this one, use the printer setup. Now I happen to use Hewlett-Packard DeskJet 1280, and as you can see it's been set to US letter. That's no good to me because I want it as an A3, and generally I like to have my my drawings in landscape mode. You'll see here also a scale of 100%. Leave it at that, 100%. It's better to avoid changing that until you really understand how this system works. In general, we don't need to touch it because it's as a system for allowing you to scale down or by a percent your print areas from design space. And I don't particularly like using it, but it's useful, and we'll show you how to use that later on. The other thing I want you to have a quick look at is up here, page attributes. Go into the vectorworks setting and just make sure that is also set at 100%. So we're good, 1 to 1, show page boundary. Those are the proper sizes for the A3 that I want, and click OK. And then magically the paper is now set. Those are the file settings that we've generally got. Now what I also want to look at, because this is also file dependent, is the number of classes we've got and the number of design layers we've got. And I'll go into those in a separate video, just to make you aware that if you go into Tools, Organization, we can now look at how many classes we've got and how many design layers we've got. And each one of those we can add to by using the new and then importing or creating a new one. I'll go into it in more detail. I just want you to be aware of that's what also is file dependent. Click on that. The other thing that I want to introduce you to is the resource browser, because this is also file dependent. And it is where we tend to get all our symbols from, either from the drawing itself or from another drawing, your library file drawing. Again, I'll show you how that works. So let's have a quick look and see what we do with this now, because as I said, this is file dependent, and I don't particularly want to keep on having to reset all these all the time. Vectorworks allows you to save it as a template. Now if you just go down there, save as template, and the default will come up. Now there is one there which is called default, and it is the one that it comes already with Vectorworks, and it's the American setup one. Now what I intend to do is to load that up, save it as default old, and then rewrite that one over. Now I've already done this, and so what I will do is I'll cancel out of that, and I'll go into there and file open. No, let's go file new. Now what it does, it tells you that you can have any one of these, and if your new one comes up, this is where it will be listed. Now the default I've already changed, so if I go into that, you'll see things start to change a little bit. There's my sheet of paper already set up. There is the origin all nicely done, and look at the top bar. And also I've got my browser, resource browser, all set up with all my files that I tend to use on my drawings. And as you can see, they're already there for me. And they load independent of the system and are file dependent. So if you have a different settings on a different file, they will load instead of what you use for your default. You'll get used to it. I'll show you more about that later.